I had to look up what sexism was because I didn't know exactly what you meant by that. And so I figured out, of course, that, you know, being treated differently than another person just because of my gender. And it was really hard for me to think of any instances other than my relationships in the past. So from my first marriage, when we got married, I was home more because I had switched roles from being a student and working full-time to trying to start my massage career, and I was home a lot more, and so it just, you know, was only natural that I would do a lot of the housework. It just worked out that way, and I never really thought of it. But he did pressure me to work more, which felt really awful. Like, I do all the housework, and, you know, and he said I didn't thank him for the money that he provided me with, and, like, also, he didn't thank me for the, you know, cleaning that I did every day, and the meals that I made every day, and, you know, and part of it might be because that's how I grew up, is my mom did all of the housework and worked full-time, and my dad, you know, was out in the shop all the time.
First of all, because I'm in athletics, so I was a collegiate coach, and I watched my mentor. She was a black woman among all these white men, and it seems like women don't have a voice in certain areas. And that's what you felt like. You felt like you were just kind of looked over. So even in public school education, where I would give a suggestion, you know, for something, and then 5 minutes later, a male colleague of mine would rephrase that, and my boss would say, "Oh, what a great idea, Ken. Let's do that." So things like that you're not really heard. And if you're more aggressive, then you are looked down upon, you know, or I should say assertive, not aggressive. And so that's been just kind of the challenge. So, and also, you know, I was thinking about this as a woman who has alopecia. It's really interesting to see how closely hair is tied to feminism, and just how much people really look at that, and they don't really talk to men that way. It was just really interesting to watch how people interact with a woman who's bald versus men who are bald. And just subtle things like that about looks and about just whether or not you are competent enough. There just seems to be a layer that you're just not as competent in certain areas. Now, child rearing, definitely women, you know, I feel sorry for men who want to go into the nursing profession and who want to go into education, because they experience the reverse sexism. And so I feel really badly for them, because they are experiencing what women who want to go into engineering experience. So those are some of the things that we've dealt with.
Yeah, I mean, obviously being a guy, like, I think the first thing, there's the reverse sexism thing, which it's very superficial, and it's very enticing. I think, particularly being a white guy, any like little bit of victimhood that we can hold on to is very enticing, you know. But at the end of the day, like, I'm the beneficiary of sexism, you know. Like, that's the like the deep structural stuff I am the beneficiary of. I'm not the victim of, you know. And even in my work, I actually had an advantage getting a job as a nurse, because they're trying to diversify, because I'm a guy, you know.
In labor and delivery.
In labor and delivery. No, I think the strongest case that the strongest evidence of systemic sexism is the fact that I don't experience it. You know, that's the strongest argument that it exists, when I'm just like, oh, sexism, I haven't thought about that in a while. You know, because I'm just like, I'm a white dude. I'm not this world was made for me, you know, like this whole place for like hundreds of years was just made for me, like specifically me, you know, white dudes. Well, I mean, there's obvious things where, like, I'm in labor and delivery and I'm a nurse. So I walk into the room and people often think I'm a doctor, or I'll walk in with a preceptor or someone who's teaching me, and I'm learning from them, and I have no idea what I'm doing. Really no idea. And they've been doing it for decades. And the patient asks a question and looks at me. You know, and I'm like, well, I don't... so there's that kind of thing. I see it in myself a lot, you know, when I go to Home Depot, for instance, and I'm like trying to find a thing or get help with a thing. I have walked by women working there, you know, when I'm really upset and looking for someone to help me and I can't find anyone for like 10 minutes, and then I'll walk by, I'll choose to not ask her the question. Mm-hmm. I've done that, you know.
Yeah.
Even though I can rationally talk through it and be like, that's insane, but I'm like, well, that's insane, but I'm going to keep walking. You know, I mean, it's fucked up. Shit like that's fucked up. Where I'm like, that's the feeling. Is like I can you know, like this. There's a man that's going to help me with this problem.
This is a really hard question to answer, because I think the biggest piece about misogyny and sexist consciousness, in that consciousness is the unseen pressure to ever acknowledge that it's even real, sort of, or to even talk about it. So, and then as soon as you do talk about it, that you need to be prepared to get attacked, mm-hmm. and doubted and criticized and critiqued for whatever you say, right? So, and then the minute, if you overstate anything or you misstate anything, then you'll lose credibility and legitimacy for whatever you're saying. So there's a big hesitation for me to even start talking about it, because I don't want to be cornered as like a man-hater, or cornered as a woman trying, you know, obsessed with these ideas and trying to always find examples, thus, you know, making them up. So I would say it's consciousness, it's not people. So it's a consciousness that's in the collective and a consciousness that's personal, so within each one of us. So in healing from this consciousness, which is basically a consciousness that devalues the feminine, so devalues women, and also the feminine principle as it exists in women or in the world, one of the biggest things is healing the consciousness itself. And when I see it happening, I don't even think that it's personal to that person. I think it's part of almost like a force or a spirit that's like possessing them or me.
There's been a lot of actually blatant examples in my work as a farmer and a landscaper of employers, male or female, really assuming that I'm not going to be as capable handling equipment as my male counterparts, even if our experience is the same, or even if I have more experience. When I was helping my dad put up a greenhouse on my farm, and we needed help at one stage, and so gathered up my housemates, two of which are male, and my dad made a comment to us about like how lucky we were to have such handy men around, or such skilled men. There was just this kind of like, it's just that specifically, I don't know, it's like we're put into our gender roles too readily sometimes, I think, and you know, I think from his assumption we would feel very lucky to have such skilled men around, versus maybe like him acknowledging that maybe we had our own skills, or maybe that wasn't why we had them around, or that, you know,
or maybe they're lucky to have such skilled women.
Yeah, something. Yeah, exactly. So it was just, you know, I sort of don't say anything in a lot of the situations, because I feel like it comes sort of from a well-meaning place of like wanting to, you know, compliment people, or just definitely being a little bit stuck in a worldview, I think, but of just like the way things are. But it doesn't come from a purposefully a place of like wanting to preserve like a unfortunate world order. Because I think the commenters, don't see it that way or haven't thought about it that way.
I really like to do physical work. I like to do manual labor, but last summer when I was working on a trail crew, the tools are not built for me. They are built for, tall men, over 6 feet, like over 100 pounds, and so I am constantly in competition with people that I can never compete with, because I'm trying to move rocks and I'm 100 pounds lighter, or I'm trying to use a chainsaw and it's half my size, and that doesn't mean that I can't do the work. It means that the tools that are supposed to enable me to do the work well are not built for me, and so that's another hurdle that I have to cross and another challenge that I have to overcome, and yet I still need to act like it's not there, and I need to act like I can compete no matter what, and that I am competing with people that physically I will never be able to match. But within myself, I have so much competition, and within the environment, there's so much competition that I am really like endangering my own body trying to prove that I can keep up with these physical specimens that I just can't keep up with. And so instead of having a set of tools that work for my body and that are functional for me, I am just trying to use things that were not built for me in an environment that I'm not supposed to be in, that I'm really not wanted to be in, and that I'm not utilized. Like my body type, my way that I use my muscles, the way that I can be like fully engaged in my work is not acknowledged and isn't really wanted within that space.
When I was in high school, I was like this kind of overachiever student all through school, and when I got to like 10th grade, the math teacher, who was the basketball coach and a man, said, "Girls, you can all consider this your last math class. You will not need to take math again, ever, because girls don't have to get beyond geometry. That's enough. And you should stop." Even though it was the top math track and all the girls there were like the top 10% of the school, right? And he also said, there really should be no girls' sports. They should put all the money into men and basketball. There's no Title IX. And there really weren't any sports. Like, I was told by my mom to take ballet. I never did any sports. I never learned how to throw a ball. And when my kids came along, daughters, they came up in a world where they kind of didn't even really believe in sexism. Like, they had never really experienced it in this community in a big way. Not like I had, not where it was like all over the place with boys do this, girls do that. They had like trucks and sticks and they could do any sport they wanted, and they didn't really believe it. And so what they thought when they were in high school and they were playing sports, they had a thing that said Lady Buccaneers on their jerseys. And I said, "Why aren't you just Buccaneers? The boys are Buccaneers, you're Buccaneers. Why are you Lady Buccaneers? Are they gentlemen Buccaneers?" And they're like, "Mom, you're being so like strident about this. We don't care if we're called Lady Buccaneers." And I'm like, "You're all Buccaneers. Like, you can be a Buccaneer, they can be a Buccaneer. If they want to be a gentleman Buccaneer, they can." And also, they had things where they would write, like, on their butts of their shorts, they would write, Lady Wolves or whatever sport they were. And I was just like, I hated that. I didn't like it. I told them, you should not be having anything written across your butt. Boys do not have anything written across their butt. If they want to have something written across their butt, they give them the shorts. You trade shorts with those boys. And again, they thought I was like being very overboard. But later, when they started getting more woke, they were like, "Mom, you were so right. We do not want things written on our butts. We do not want to be Lady Buccaneers. We thought you were being overboard, but now that we've been out in the world a little bit, we completely see what you're talking about." And I had a lot of menish jobs, like jobs where men are surprised that I'm there, and I have to prove myself. And they're like, hey, look, you can even do your job. How cool is that? Hey, look, it's a woman. She can do her job. You know, like that has actually happened to me a lot. Hundreds of times, perhaps. Especially like when I was doing construction. On a construction site, I was always the only woman there, and it was just like people watching over my shoulder until they saw I could do it. And they were like, hey, Joe, look. Which was funny, and it made me feel like proud. I can do my job, but also like, I'm not watching you to see if you can do your job, although I notice you can't. You know? I don't know. It's just funny. It's a weird world.
Yeah, it's so hard to think about specific instances because it's like what is sexism just any manifestation of patriarchy or misogyny? Because then you have like the instances in which I've been sexually assaulted, and I didn't think of it that way when I was younger. I thought of it as just like, oh, I put myself in this dumb situation, and of course this old man grabbed my boobs because like I shouldn't have been there, and like I shouldn't have been hitchhiking, so this old man like tried to grab my vagina, so like I was asking for it. And it's only been very recently that I've been like, oh, that was their bad. Like they shouldn't have done that, no matter what I was doing or where I was. That wasn't just an instance of me being naive, though perhaps it was, but it wasn't just like a natural thing that I was asking for. It was like these people did wrong. And I think that maybe part of my experience of sexism is like not just those experiences themselves, but also the way I interpreted them and the stories I told myself about them for years. And thinking about the fact that like I don't feel particularly traumatized by any one of those instances. Like for the most part it was like, ugh, this is uncomfortable, and this is wrong. But what I realized is that just because I may not have been like extremely traumatized doesn't mean that they didn't influence the way I see the world. And I realized that each of these instances was like contributing to my story about my place in the world and my sense of myself as a human, and like my sense of the narrative of what it is to be a female and a woman in this culture.
Ways that sexism kind of pervades and is more subversive, it comes in really, I've just found ways that you wouldn't necessarily see it if you weren't looking for it. And I feel like I am looking for it now. And even like that simple statement of like, I am looking for sexism now, like causes this defensiveness in men, which is like such a protectiveness of sexism. It's like starting to challenge those power dynamics. And so while it feels very empowering to be able for me to say like, no, that's being sexist, or like you can't do that, or this is what I'm calling it out for what I see it as, creates like this just a challenge. And I see it in ways, I guess my like most simple example that happened kind of recently is I work at the farmer's market, and the market manager is a man, and Chad and I show up to the farmer's market, and his like reference is always Chad, like regardless of what I am handling or what like responsibilities I have, his go-to is always my male counterpart. And then I see that everywhere, where the defer to the man in the situation, like whether that means like I'll shake everybody's hand in the circle except for the woman, and or like the voice that is the least heard, regardless of context, regardless of like status or situation.
My experience with sexism is I've considered myself a certain way in regard to sexism: sensitive, open, protective. I've been very afraid of I've had a life of being like, whether it was like, I've had like this anger at this father figure that I never knew that left. I've had this mistrust of men that hurt my family, men that hurt me. I'm 38, and I spent most of my early years very angry at men. Being a man was confusing. And in these past few years, I've had some great healing going on that has had to do with forgiveness of men, of myself. Easily triggered by topics of sexism. I'm very twisted up in regard to concepts of sexism, whether it was with this history I mentioned with not trusting men while being a man, while being protective of the women in my life, and being afraid of myself or something in me, being something that I share with these abusers. So I don't know that actually I have much developed around this question to share, except for just that I'm kind of lost within it. So I try not to talk much about it because I don't know what my stance is. I don't have a stance, but I don't know though. When I do have a stance, I tend to end up in a fight I don't mean to be in. So I think that's the best thing I have to offer, is just, if I am this big, if I'm a tall white American male, then I can, if I have all this privilege, then I can, by listening, I feel like I'm doing a huge thing.
Okay, so I would say, I guess, I was raised in like a pretty religious home, like a pretty religious conservative Christian household. And I remember, questioning my mom about her relationship with my dad. Like, she felt like if they had a disagreement, that she would need to submit to him. And even if she disagreed, ultimately, like, she would express her opinion, but ultimately she had to submit to his authority. And like, I feel like, looking at their relationships, a lot of times when she did that, it wasn't a good choice. And she would just have to, like, my dad would be like, nope, this is what we're doing. And she would just go along with it, even if it was like a really stupid decision that affected all of us. Yeah. So the other thing that I was taught, because of how I was raised, was really not to use my voice, not to stand up for myself, sort of just to like be submissive, or don't make waves, don't stand up for yourself, you don't want to offend anyone, or sort of like being sweet. But what that led to in the future was sort of me getting in situations where I was abused, because I didn't know how to stand up for myself, and I was taught not to. And it was sort of like this spiritual thing, like, you're supposed to be sweet and submissive, and so I was in situations where I was emotionally or spiritually abused, because, never physically, thankfully, but because of how I was taught, how I was raised.
I think of a conversation a couple of summers ago. I don't know how long ago it was now, but here at dinner, and we were talking about our language and how we talk about women and referring to women as girls. In particular, 20 to 30 something women as girls, and sensing into that, being confronted with that behavior, and sensing into and recognizing the disconnect, the double standard. Like, don't call myself a boy, or other people in their 20s or 30s a boy, other men. And of course it's just part of our language, but I came to realize that that's not in and of itself a good excuse. It's kind of reflective of sexism in our culture. It became interesting to me to start noticing that and realize, oh yeah, wow, what is that? And it was uncomfortable. There was that initial challenge and defensiveness, and like, what is it? What is it? I felt kind of threatened by this idea of according women equal respect just in the way that I talk about them. And it had something to do with, like, my wife is a woman. I don't refer to her as a girl, but it almost feels threatening to refer to other women as women or something like that. Like it's almost like it's mixed up there somehow. But in any case, I committed to just calling women women, and so now it's kind of a nice thing that, you know, if I hear my friends or someone, usually friends, I haven't had too many of these situations, but just to be able to confront them gently and sort of start asking questions. And it's like, you know, and they have reasons just like I did, but it's kind of like, yeah, are there really any good reasons? And so that's kind of how I've tried to raise my consciousness around it a little bit.
So my stories, I have two of them, both occurred in 1975, 1976. I just graduated from college, and over Christmas I got a job at Macy's department store, and a guy I knew also got a job. It was a seasonal job, and he was getting 10 cents more an hour than I was. And we couldn't figure out why, and so we looked at our job descriptions, and we had the exact same job descriptions, except his said lift heavy boxes, and he never had a heavy box to lift at all. We had the exact same job, but because he was a male, he got paid 10 cents more an hour than I did. That wasn't as bad as after holidays were over. I was living in Sacramento, moved down to the Bay Area, and I was living with my boyfriend, and we both graduated from Berkeley, and we both went to one of those places that looks for jobs for you. He went the first day, and he got a job, sent to a job position as a manager at a Mervyn's department store. I went the second day, and I was sent to a cashier at Morris Plan Loan Company. So I went to this job, and I indeed was a cashier. I worked there for 6 months. I had more college education than the manager and the assistant manager. Not that that should necessarily matter, but I asked the district man after about 3 or 4 months if I could apply as a manager, and he said no. I had to complete the entire cashier book. It would take like 2 years before I could be considered as a management material. They were never cashiers.
When I was in elementary, I was playing on the playground, and I remember this moment where there was this girl, and I was like playing with her, and I said something like, "That's because you're a girl," and then she just punched me in the stomach, and like I just kind of like went to my knees, and it was a really powerful moment for me because like I feel like I didn't really think of her as a threat, or like, you know, or even like, I don't know. It was just a really powerful moment, and I will never forget it, like that moment of her just kind of doing, like, you know, punching me in the gut.
I noticed that when I worked in retail that only men were in management. Women had to do the be cashiers and check, and were like chained to the cash registers except for their little breaks. And it was irritating to me that there was no place for women in management. It was just you were a cashier, and the men, even if they were baggers, could get into management before a woman could.
It's not like bad men, you are the sexist. Totally not. It's like, it's deep in the fabric of our society, such that we are all in it as well, as much as anybody. And what do I find now? I find this role that like women and mothers and wives have around being like kind of a caretaker person, the bag holder, the person who like, when the shit hits the fan, they're the one that is like stepping up in a way that I just rarely see in the same roles for men. Like maybe that's out there, and I see it sometimes, but just not in the same way. And I know that I have created that. I have seen it in my grandmother and my mother and myself, and it's not that someone has crammed me into that. I walked into it open arms and just embodied it, like this makes me a good person or something. And lately I've been really questioning that and thinking, why is it that way? What if I just sit down here now and have a little cold drink of water and hope everybody else steps up to the plate? You know, like they're not used to it. It's bad. Like nobody's, it'd be shocking in a way. Like when I even mention it, people are kind of like freaked out about it. But it's just, it's almost like you hear about these like kind of good women roles, and it's hard to get away from it because it does feel sort of like good in a way, and then also kind of enclosed also. And sometimes I'll see something where I'll see somebody who is not embodying that, and I have the part of me that says, whoa, like, what are they doing? That seems so not right. Like, they're just sitting there. They're not, like, stepping up. And I think, why don't I just sit the fuck down right now? Why don't I? I'm like, I can sometimes, but I'm not that good at it.
Yeah.
So, I don't think that I personally have felt a lot of sexism because I'm pretty young. And I guess, I know that I have, like, those minute things, the confidence gap especially. But I'm very observant to, I'm very observant to how other people experience it. And I've observed, like, in the online community and just people from different places, how they struggle a lot more than necessarily I have. So I think that it is dumb when people say, like, the feminist movement ended in 1920, because I don't think that it did. Like, I don't think that necessarily it's over until every woman is equal and comfortable, and whatever that may be, until they're truly, honestly feel like they're equal. And even though I personally don't feel sexism on a day-to-day basis, I know that there's lots of people who do, and I am passionate about bringing that to an end. So.
And so in that regard, I feel like one of the most powerful ways that I'm noticing sexism affect me is in the way that it's ingrained in my own consciousness, especially around my own voice. So, like, I have witnessed in myself ways in which I kind of pull my punches, or I don't speak certain things that I see, because I am afraid of the kickback. I've also noticed it in the sense of my own voice, of feeling weak, like that my voice feels weak. So when I'm saying something, it's like as if what I have to say doesn't carry any weight behind it or authority. So, and my experience doesn't carry any weight or authority, or it can be easily dismissed. I feel like part of the work of shifting sexism is to do a lot of internal work, where I really recognize ways in which I've internalized misogyny or patriarchal consciousness, in which I devalue myself and my own voice. I doubt my own experiences and question the legitimacy of them. You know, I'll have an experience over and over again, and then when it comes to the time of expressing it, I'll doubt it. I'll question it. I'll think, well, am I missing a perspective? Am I being selfish? Am I being self-aggrandizing? Am I just focused too much on my own self? Instead of being able to really trust my own experience as authoritative enough for me to speak to and believe in, that my own experience, whether or not anybody else agrees with me or gets it or sees that it carries authority and it carries legitimacy. Simply, it is one of the truths. It is my truth, you know.